Sitting in a canoe, watching families of elephant coming down to the river to drink is a marvellous experience. But to be in a cave, in the pitch blackness, where you can't see them, and yet you can hear the creak of their bodies and that extraordinarily low, rumbling call, that is something else. And to tell you about that, here is Justine Evans, who spent night after night after night in that cave in Mount Elgon with her cameras.
It was not so much scary. I don't know even if it was dangerous, but it felt intimidating at least, and quite overwhelming. It sounded worse than it was because the cave walls made the sound of the elephants resonate, so it just felt like they were roaring, right next to me. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 in here at once, which was amazing. And they came all the way to the back, and we got all sorts of shots. And the baby was like standing in the dark, obviously really bored because it doesn't know how to tusk yet. And he was just doing this with his trunk and going like around in circles.
The cave elephant families follow ancient traditional pathways used by many previous generations. There's some kind of inherited culture. Young calves following in their mother's footsteps, may be too young to dig for salt, but they're here to learn the traditions of Mount Elgon's elephants. The notion that elephants might have traditions would have been unthinkable only a few decades ago. But since then, scientists have started to study elephants by living alongside them in the field and recognizing each individual one. No one knows them better than Cynthia Moss, who's lived in Amboseli for the past 30 years and recognizes every member of 50 families, the most famous of whom, perhaps, is Echo. We first filmed Echo in 1993, and since then, we've followed her reign as head of the herd.
Echo is now a grand old matriarch. Her crossed tusks make her unmistakable. This is her latest grandson. Ella, with ragged ears, is her second in command.
Initially, ears identified individuals.
Their ears are never absolutely smooth along the edge. There's usually little nicks or holes or whatever. But after a while, you get so used to them, and you recognize the whole elephant.
Wildlife cameraman Martin Kolbeck has worked alongside Cynthia, and together they gained a deeper insight.
Cynthia Moss's knowledge of individual elephants has been very significant for us as filmmakers. It would have been very difficult for me to do it on my own because I had no idea who the individuals were and I had no idea how they related to each other.
Cynthia and Martin were accepted as part of the family.
I think one of the most exciting things I've ever seen and filmed with the elephants was the birth of a calf, the matriarch's calf, in fact. I just never thought that we'd ever be able to film it. For a family of elephants, the matriarch, to trust us enough to give birth right next to us in the middle of the night was quite a privilege, and it took us several years to get ourselves into this situation. But when the delivery finally happened, the whole family went completely crazy. There were sounds that they were making that I've never heard elephants make before. There was such a sense of excitement, and they all crowded around Echo. It was extraordinary. It was a magical moment.
When there's such a bond of mutual trust and understanding, the detail of the elephant's behaviour emerges and the drama of their lives is revealed.
Most of the time, Cynthia Moss was there interpreting behaviour. There's a very good example of that when there was a situation where one of our family's calves was kidnapped by another family. Now, that's a very rare bit of behaviour, and I would have had no idea that that was about to happen.
Echo gets a vicious poke in the backside when she tries to rescue Ebony from this larger and dominant family. The other matriarch, called V, is using Ebony to emphasize her dominance. But help is on the way. Reacting to Ebony's distress calls and Echo's alarms, Ella and the rest of the family arrive in tight formation and plunge into the kidnappers.
Ebony was rescued by her family. For some elephants, the strength of the family is even more important, and inherited traditions are the difference between life and death. This is most clearly the case for the elephants of Namibia.
They live in desert, not savanna, and so they're having to move over enormous distances to find food and water. The matriarch is like a repository of knowledge for the whole family. They know exactly where they need to go in order to be able to feed, and they must have complex mental maps of an enormous area because the waterholes are extremely isolated and they're only there at certain times of year. So their intelligence and mental mapping ability must be phenomenal. And that knowledge is passed down through generation after generation.